Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the main tactical themes that resulted in Arsenal's first half dominance in their 2-1 win over Leeds United. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Arsenal's pressing, then we'll shift to Leeds' defensive shape, and lastly we'll highlight Arsenal's direct play that helped them dominate that opening half. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-3-3 and Leeds starting in a 4-2-3-1. So first we'll focus on Arsenal's pressing, and they did a very good job of ensuring that Leeds encountered several issues with building out of the back. It started with Nketiah dealing with the center backs. You would expect the wide players to close down Firpo and Ayling, and then in that midfield zone, you do have Odegaard and Xhaka who could push towards Click and Phillips, and Elneny tracking the movement of James. We did witness some variation from this Arsenal press because there were times where you had Odegaard stepping towards Diego Llorente and then blocking off the passing lane in towards Phillips, or you would simply have Saka pushing towards the center back, blocking off the passing lane in towards Firpo, and if he was bypassed, I would see Cedric pushing high to deal with Firpo, and Elneny shifting across to deal with Harrison, while Gabriel can step towards James because Holding was often dealing with the center forward. The only other alternative to prevent a 2v1 up front would be to have Odegaard stepping towards the center back as well, and although he could block off the passing lane in towards Phillips, there would be times where you would see Elneny and Xhaka stepping towards the Leeds United double pivot, and that would leave Dan James free in that midfield zone. But in several occasions, what you'd end up seeing was that Gabriel would step forward to close him down, and at times that did present some nervy moments. Frankly, it did get Gabriel booked, but it ensured that Leeds United couldn't break forward in transition on a consistent basis. What should also be noted with Arsenal starting 11 is that they did play Tomiyasu at left back and they kept Cedric at right back. The reason why they started Tomiyasu at left back was to ensure that they did have adequate defensive cover for Rafinha, who is Leeds United's main threat in their attack. And what you ended up seeing was that when they pressed from the left-hand side, it was Martinelli closing down Ayling, they had Tomiyasu dealing with Rafinha, and then Xhaka pushing forward, sometimes in towards Leeds' final third to deal with Click. This was a successful press down the left-hand side, and it was no surprise that this pressure ultimately resulted in Leeds United conceding their opening goal, as Arsenal's pressure from the front, starting with Martinelli, forced the ball back to the keeper, and from there Nketiah was able to pounce to force a mistake. So ideally what you ended up witnessing was that Nketiah was stepping towards Koch, you had Martinelli dealing with Ayling, Tomiyasu pushing towards Rafinha, and then you had Xhaka and Odegaard dealing with the two midfielders dropping off deeper, and then Gabriel would step towards James, and Elneny would deal with Harrison if he drifted centrally to receive the ball away from Cedric, or any forward runners moving into the central zone. Even if you had the center forward dropping off of Holding to make his movement in towards that area, Elneny would be tasked with closing him down as the spare man. And then in regards to Arsenal dropping off into two banks of four, they had Nketiah and Odegaard sitting on Click and Phillips. And then from there, what you end up seeing is that Martinelli and Saka are out in the wider areas. And from there, they could comfortably deal with any threat that Leeds were posing, because Rafinha was struggling against Tomiyasu for the most part. Cedric could deal with Harrison. They had a 2v1 against the center forward. And then even if Elneny was sitting on James, he could toss him over towards Xhaka if Harrison dropped off in towards that central area. And the same thing applied towards Rafinha. If Rafinha dropped in towards that central area, Xhaka could pick him up. And then Elneny could deal with James. And for the most part, Arsenal were fairly comfortable when they dropped off into two banks of four. Whereas when we look to Leeds' defensive shape, it was very narrow, and they often did look to have Elneny being closed down by James. From there, it could be Click and Phillips dealing with Odegaard and Xhaka, but Rafinha and Harrison were in very narrow shapes, with Rafinha often stepping towards Gabriel and looking to block off the passing lane into towards Tomiyasu. It seemed that he wasn't wary of Tomiyasu's threat going forward, and they could simply have Click shift across for cover, or have Rafinha track back as well. The issue that they encountered with this shape was that, one, Arsenal weren't scared of going long, and they often were targeting Firpo and Ayling. So if it was Ramsdale or the center backs getting on the ball, they could simply play long balls over the top for Saka or Martinelli looking to break in behind, and that was a reoccurring theme throughout this game. Over on the right-hand side, Odegaard was looking to receive the ball in between Phillips and Harrison, as there were times where he was looking to make forward runs in between Diego Llorente and Firpo, but if he wasn't looking to receive the ball in between that gap of Phillips and Harrison, he would often shift laterally towards the touchline on the outside of Harrison, and then he would look to pull out Phillips, and if not, he would receive the ball freely in that zone. Whereas on the left-hand side, side, what ended up happening here was that if they could get the ball towards Xhaka or Tomiyasu, Rafinha was often caught out in a narrow position, and then the ball could be instantly transferred in towards Martinelli to get him into a 1v1 with Ayling, in which Rafinha would have to track back, or Click would have to shift across to make it a 1v2, and then that would free up space for Xhaka pushing forward to serve as a free passing outlet in the final third. In this example, we witnessed Gabriel splitting Rafinha and James for Xhaka in the halfway circle, and you can see that Click is applying tight pressure from behind, but focus on Tomiyasu unmarked in the left channel. Xhaka locates Tomiyasu unmarked, and he plays a first-time ball into the path of the left back to ensure that Click can't step in to make a tackle. As we watch that play develop, you can see that Tomiyasu now can break forward, and ahead of him he has Martinelli hugging the touchline to get himself in a 1v1 with Ayling. When Tomiyasu carries that ball forward, he slides it into the path of Martinelli, and as you can see, Martinelli halts the attack as he drags 4 Leeds players towards him, and that creates a passing lane to square the ball into the path of Xhaka. When Xhaka receives the ball, he can slide it into the path of Nketiah, Odegaard, or Martinelli, but he looks to play it into the path of Odegaard, who looks to break forward towards the penalty area because Harrison doesn't track back, and Phillips has left his man unmarked to pick up Nketiah, and you don't see Diego Llorente stepping forward. What Odegaard does well here is that he anticipates Firpo stepping towards him when he receives the ball, and he backheels it into the path of the unmarked Saka, breaking into right half space, and from here Saka waits for the ball to come towards his left foot, and rather than taking a touch or breaking towards the ball, he fires a first-time effort on goal that the keeper pushes away easily. The other approach that Leeds took here was that they would press from the front, with Rafinha helping the center forward close down the center backs and James dealing with Elneny, but again you have Ramsdale who could play the ball out to his free outlet in Tomiyasu, or simply look to play long balls in towards Saka or Martinelli to get them into 1v1s. When Leeds dropped off deeper, it was often 2 narrow banks of 4, and that still didn't really help their case because you had Xhaka and Odegaard pushing forward, and it was more of a 4-1-5. Tomiyasu was free as an outlet towards the left, and what you ended up seeing here was that Arsenal's plan was clear. They were trying to get Saka and Martinelli against the fullbacks, and then from there they would serve as creative outlets to find Nketiah, or the movement of Xhaka and Odegaard breaking in towards the final third, or they were looking to switch play to the free wide player on the opposite flank to play them into a legitimate goal-scoring position. Here you witness Cedric dragging away Harrison towards the right touchline to apply pressure, and ahead of Cedric you have Odegaard and Xhaka pulling away the Leeds double pivot, and Nketiah ahead of the center backs. To Cedric's right, you witness Saka making a run off Firpo, who's flat-footed, and he clips the ball over the top to bypass the high line, and when he receives the ball, you have Odegaard making a run off both central midfielders and Nketiah breaking towards the box, and Saka does well to hold up Firpo. He locates Odegaard making a run into right half space and Nketiah occupying the 2 center backs, and when he plays the ball into the path of Odegaard, he drags away a center back, and from here he does well to flick his first touch over Diego Llorente, and he should be squaring the ball back into the path of Nketiah, but when he fires his effort through the 6-yard box, Nketiah doesn't attack it, and Leeds do a very good job of clearing their lines. So if we look to the left-hand side, it was Gabriel, Tomiyasu, and Xhaka on various areas of the pitch looking to play the ball in towards Martinelli. Gabriel would lead from the back and play long balls over the top. You would expect Tomiyasu to be the free outlet playing the ball in towards Martinelli to run at Ayling, and there were even times where Xhaka dropped off into that inside left position, and Tomiyasu would push into the gap between Ayling and Koch, and then that would leave space for Martinelli to get into a 1v1 position. Over on the right-hand side, if Odegaard wasn't dropping off deeper ahead of the midfield bank to get on the ball, he could switch play out to Martinelli, and it was Ramsdale holding or Cedric playing long balls over the top for Saka as he was looking to make runs in behind Firpo. And Nketiah's role up front was to serve as a legitimate goal-scoring option by making good runs in towards the penalty area, but as he's done in previous games, he's done a very good job of dropping off deeper into the midfield zone or at times in towards his own half to link play with his teammates to help retain possession and bypass Leeds United's press. So as you can see, Arsenal's intent to exploit the Leeds United fullbacks by playing balls in towards Martinelli and Saka directly created several chances for Arsenal, but it also impacted the game as Martinelli's run in behind Ayling led to a desperate lunge towards the byline that resulted in a sending off. That forced Leeds to pivot and shift into more of a 4-4-1, and that's where you ended up seeing James playing just ahead of Elneny, and he was now leading the line, and they sacrificed their center forward to bring on Struijk. The issue that Leeds United's 4-4-1 encountered against Arsenal's shape was that now Xhaka was pushing into advanced positions and occupying Koch, and then Nketiah was shifting over to deal with Diego Llorente. That created an avenue for Martinelli to freely receive the ball in towards the left channel as it created an overload, because Rafinha was getting caught higher up the pitch, looking to close down Gabriel and not even focused on Tomiyasu. Even if that wasn't the case with Xhaka, he would be occupying Click, and then Nketiah would shift laterally into that gap between Diego Llorente, and he would often push ahead of Koch to pull him out of position, and then that would create more space for Martinelli to break in behind as well. The other alternative for Arsenal was to push Tomiyasu higher and then have Xhaka dropping off a bit deeper, and then from there you still have Nketiah pulling out Diego Llorente, Tomiyasu dealing with the opposing side's right back, and then Xhaka would still be free as a passing option because Rafinha wasn't looking to shift across. In the build-up to Arsenal's second goal, you witness Xhaka in an inside left position looking to carry the ball beyond James, and you have Martinelli hugging the touchline with Tomiyasu occupying Ayling. When Xhaka steps forward, he slides the ball into the path of Martinelli, but focus on Tomiyasu occupying Koch and Ayling, and then you could see Nketiah in a deeper midfield position beyond Click. As Martinelli receives the ball, you could see that James and Rafinha are bypassed, and now focus on Nketiah running off the central midfield as they're ball watching in towards the penalty area. As Rafinha attempts to recover to make a challenge, Martinelli does well of holding off that challenge and carrying the ball beyond Ayling into right half space, and from there you could see that Nketiah has made a run in towards the penalty area unmarked, and with Koch shifting across attempting to block the pullback, Martinelli does well of playing the ball across him into the path of Nketiah, who's unmarked, and he side foots a first time effort beyond the keeper. Over on the right hand side, you had Nketiah sitting in between the center backs, and then Odegaard could push forward to deal with Struijk or Firpo, and then that would create lanes for Saka to be the spare man, as Odegaard's positioning would take away Firpo, or you'd end up seeing Nketiah shifting into that zone and Firpo being dragged in narrow, and then that would create space for Saka to be the spare man towards the back post. Here you witness Saka holding off Firpo and dropping off the ball into the path of Elneny. You could see that Rafinha is not tracking Tomiyasu or Martinelli, so Elneny switches the route of attack to place Martinelli in a 1v1 with Ayling. Ayling forces Martinelli towards the byline, but Martinelli does a very good job of shrugging off the defender and breaking towards that zone. However, what you end up seeing is Koch and Rafinha are shifting over to provide cover pressure. It creates a 1v3 and Martinelli has to retreat. As we speed up that play, you could see that Martinelli holds off the pressure and could square the ball into the path of Odegaard, but he locates Saka and Nketiah overloading Firpo at the back post, and he clips the ball towards that zone, and while he does bypass Saka and Firpo, it falls into the path of Nketiah, who has to make contact with this delivery, but you could say that it's slightly overhit and Nketiah can't test the goalkeeper, and that wastes a golden opportunity. And if we look to another example, you can see there's no pressure applied towards Gabriel. He slides the ball across Rafinha, who's caught higher up the pitch, and it places Martinelli in a 1v1 with Koch. As Martinelli runs at the makeshift right back, you could see Tomiyasu is making an overlapping run to drag away Rafinha, and that results in Martinelli now looking to cut the ball on towards his right foot to bypass Rafinha, who's breaking in late. He opts to drop the ball back into the path of Xhaka, breaking towards the penalty area as he takes out Click, and Martinelli places Xhaka in a position where he could get the ball back as he breaks into right half space, but when he looks in the penalty area, he sees Odegaard occupying a center back. You also have Nketiah occupying Struijk, and now you can see Saka calling for the ball beyond Firpo, who's caught flat-footed and ball watching. However, unfortunately for Arsenal fans, when Xhaka looks to combine with Saka breaking towards the far post, his deliveries miss hit and it falls into the path of Firpo, who has an easy job of clearing the lines, and that wastes a golden Arsenal attack. This forced Leeds to alter their shape, and they ended up shifting into more of a 5-3-1 as Rafinha was now dropping off deeper just ahead of Martinelli to ensure that he couldn't receive the ball freely to run towards their penalty area. And while Rafinha did receive help from Koch and Click on a few occasions, it still wasn't an ideal matchup for Rafinha, as it resulted with Martinelli making runs off of Rafinha's shoulder and exploiting his poor positioning as he isn't a natural defender, and breaking in behind, searching for passes from Gabriel, Xhaka, Tomiyasu, Elneny, or Odegaard. So as you can see, this was a fairly comfortable win for Arsenal, in which their attempt to play direct, utilize their wide players as creators, and exploit Leeds' fullbacks presented several issues for the away side, and despite a nervy conclusion to the game, Mikel Arteta's men should have secured 3 points by halftime.